The transport truck rumbled to a stop outside Forward Operating Base Zulu, kicking up a cloud of desert dust that seemed to hang in the air like a warning. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos stepped down from the vehicle, her combat boots hitting the packed earth with a solid thud. The heat was oppressive, even at 0600 hours, and she could already feel sweat beginning to form under her body armor. Around her, soldiers moved with the practiced efficiency of a unit that had been deployed together for months. They barely glanced at the new arrival, except for a few who noticed the medical patch on her right shoulder and the distinctive markings that identified her as a combat medic. What they didn't notice immediately was the collection of smaller patches adorning her left shoulder, a story written in fabric and thread that would soon change everything. "You must be Santos," called a voice from across the compound. A tall, lean sergeant approached with the kind of swagger that came from being the unofficial leader of the enlisted men. "I'm Sergeant Mike Rodriguez. Been running medical operations here since our last medic rotated out 3 months ago." He extended a hand, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Hope you're ready for this. Afghanistan doesn't mess around." Maria shook his hand firmly, noting the slight surprise in his expression at her grip strength. "Ready as anyone can be, Sergeant. What do you need me?" Rodriguez gestured toward a series of prefab buildings arranged in a rough square around the compound center. "Medical bay is over there. Not much to look at, but it gets the job done. We've been handling most of our own first aid, so having a real medic back will be helpful." The pause was deliberate, loaded with the kind of skepticism she'd encountered at every posting. As they walked across the compound, Maria caught fragments of conversation from the soldiers they passed. The usual deployment talk, complaints about the food, speculation about when they'd rotate home, good-natured ribbing about who had the worst luck on patrol. But underneath it all, she sensed something else, a tension that went beyond the normal stress of being in a combat zone. "How long has this unit been deployed?" she asked as they reached the medical facility. 14 months, Rodriguez replied, pulling open the door to reveal a surprisingly well-organized treatment area. "We were supposed to rotate out 2 months ago, but you know how it goes. Mission requirements changed." He gestured around the space with obvious pride. "I've kept things running smooth. Haven't lost a single soldier on my watch." The medical bay was indeed impressive for a forward position. Clean, organized, with supplies neatly arranged and equipment properly maintained. Rodriguez had clearly taken his temporary responsibilities seriously. But as Maria examined the setup, she noticed gaps, medications that should have been refrigerated sitting at room temperature, tourniquets stored improperly, and a few procedures that weren't quite up to standard. "This is solid work," she said diplomatically. "You've done well keeping everyone healthy." Rodriguez's chest swelled slightly at the praise. "Like I said, haven't lost anyone. That's what matters, right?" Before Maria could respond, the compound's alarm system began wailing. The sharp, electronic sound cut through the desert air like a knife, and suddenly, the relaxed atmosphere of the early morning vanished. Soldiers began moving with urgent purpose, grabbing weapons and gear with the fluid motions of a unit that had done this many times before. "Incoming wounded," Rodriguez called out, already moving toward the radio mounted on the wall. Patrol hit an IED about 10 clicks south. 2 casualties, both conscious but requesting immediate medical support. Maria was already moving, her hands automatically checking equipment and supplies. "What's our transport situation? Can we get birds in the air?" "Negative on air support," Rodriguez replied, listening intently to the radio chatter. "Weather's turning bad to the south, and we've got potential hostile activity in the area. Ground transport only, and it's going to be a rough ride." This was exactly the kind of situation Maria had trained for, but she could see the doubt in Rodriguez's eyes. He'd been handling medical emergencies for months without a trained combat medic, and now he was supposed to step aside and let the new arrival take charge. The politics of military hierarchy were always complicated, but they became downright dangerous when lives were on the line. "I'll take point on this," Maria said firmly. "You know the unit and the area better than I do, so I'll need your support. But medical decisions go through me." "Agreed." Rodriguez hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Your show, Santos. But these are my guys getting hurt out there. They're all our guys, Maria replied, already assembling her field medical kit. And we're going to bring them home. The next 20 minutes were a blur of preparation and coordination. Maria worked with quick efficiency, selecting supplies and medications while Rodriguez handled communications and logistics. Despite his obvious reservations about relinquishing medical authority, he proved to be a valuable partner, anticipating her needs and providing crucial information about the patrol and the area where they'd been hit. The rescue convoy consisted of 2 armored vehicles, a mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle in the lead, followed by an armored Humvee carrying the medical team. Maria found herself in the passenger seat of the second vehicle, medical supplies secured around her, radio headset crackling with updates from the wounded patrol. As they rolled out of the gate and onto the desert road, Maria felt the familiar mixture of adrenaline and focus that came with heading toward danger. This was what she'd trained for, what she'd volunteered for when she'd chosen to become a combat medic. But she also knew that every eye in the convoy was on her, waiting to see if the new medic could handle the pressure. The landscape outside was desolate, endless stretches of sand and rock broken only by the occasional cluster of mud brick buildings or stunted vegetation. The road, such as it was, consisted of packed earth and gravel that had been roughly leveled by previous military traffic. Every bump and hole in the surface sent jolts through the armored vehicle, making it difficult to prepare equipment or review medical procedures. First time downrange, asked the driver, a young specialist whose name tape read Jackson. First time in Afghanistan, Maria replied, keeping her voice steady. But not my first deployment. Iraq, Jackson asked, negotiating around a particularly large pothole. Among other places, Maria didn't elaborate, but she noticed Jackson's quick glance in the rearview mirror. He'd seen something in her demeanor that suggested more experience than a typical staff sergeant might have. The radio crackled to life with an update from the wounded patrol. Medical 1, this is Bravo 3. First casualty is stable, but losing blood from a leg wound. Second casualty is conscious, but reporting severe abdominal pain. Both soldiers are ambulatory, but requesting immediate medical attention. Maria keyed her microphone. Bravo 3, Medical 1. ETA 15 minutes. Keep both casualties calm and still. Do not attempt to remove any embedded debris. If bleeding is severe, apply direct pressure, but do not use tourniquets unless bleeding cannot be controlled. How copy? Good copy, Medical 1. Both casualties acknowledge. Rodriguez's voice came through on the team frequency. Santos, you sure about the tourniquet guidance? Standard protocol is immediate application for any significant extremity bleeding. Maria considered her response carefully. Rodriguez wasn't wrong about standard protocol, but protocols were guidelines, not absolute rules. Understood, Rodriguez. We'll assess on arrival and make the call based on actual conditions. It was a small thing, but she could sense the attention it drew from the other soldiers in the convoy. The new medic was making judgment calls that deviated from textbook procedures. Either she was dangerously inexperienced, or she knew something the rest of them didn't. The convoy continued south, deeper into territory that felt increasingly hostile despite the apparent emptiness. Maria used the time to review her mental checklist of trauma procedures, inventory her supplies one more time, and prepare for whatever they might find when they reached the wounded patrol. As they crested a small rise in the terrain, Jackson pointed ahead to a cluster of vehicles in the distance. There they are. Looks like they've set up a defensive perimeter. Maria could see the patrol's vehicles arranged in a protective circle, with soldiers positioned to provide security in all directions. Smoke was still rising from what appeared to be the site of the IED blast, and she could make out figures moving around what must be the casualties. Medical 1, this is Bravo 3, the radio crackled. We have you in sight. Casualties are in the center of our perimeter, northern side. Be advised, we had possible enemy movement to the east about 10 minutes ago, but no contact since then. Copy, Bravo 3. We're coming in. As their convoy approached the patrol's position, Maria could feel the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. In a few minutes, she would face her first test as the unit's combat medic. 2 soldiers were wounded, and depending on her skills, and an entire unit was watching to see if she measured up to their standards. The vehicle came to a stop, and Maria was moving before the dust had settled. Her medical bag was in her hand, radio headset still connected, eyes already assessing the scene as she approached the casualties. This was the moment when reputation was made or broken, when months of training and years of experience would be put to the ultimate test. The first casualty was a young private with a tourniquet already applied to his left leg, his face pale, but alert. The second was a sergeant sitting upright, but clearly in pain, one hand pressed against his abdomen. Both looked up as Maria approached, hope and uncertainty mixing in their expressions. "I'm Staff Sergeant Santos, your medic," she said calmly, kneeling beside the first casualty. "We're going to take good care of you both and get you home safely." As her hands began their practiced assessment of the wounded soldiers, Maria was acutely aware of the circle of observers surrounding them. Rodriguez was close by, ready to assist or take over if needed. The other soldiers maintained their security positions but kept glancing toward the medical treatment area. Word would spread quickly through the unit about how the new medic performed under pressure. The leg wound was significant but manageable. The tourniquet had been properly applied and was controlling the bleeding effectively. A fragment of shrapnel had created a deep laceration, but it had missed the major blood vessels and bone. The abdominal injury was more concerning, requiring careful palpation and assessment to determine the extent of internal damage. "How are you feeling, Sergeant?" Maria asked the second casualty as she examined him. "Like I got kicked by a mule, but I've been worse," he replied with a weak grin. "Name's Thompson. This your first rodeo with us?" "First day on the job," Maria confirmed, continuing her examination. "But not my first day doing this job." Something in her tone must have reassured Thompson because his expression relaxed slightly. Around them, the other soldiers continued their security watch, but Maria could sense their attention shifting toward her work. First impressions mattered in the military, and combat situations had a way of stripping away all the politics and posturing to reveal who could actually perform when it mattered. As she worked, Maria began to understand why this unit felt different from others she'd served with. They moved together with the kind of precision that came from extended combat deployment, but there's also an undercurrent of fatigue and stress that went beyond normal mission fatigue. 14 months was a long time to be deployed, and extended rotations had a way of wearing down even the best soldiers. The medical treatment continued with Rodriguez assisting competently, following Maria's lead without question once he saw her calm professionalism in action. The casualties were stabilized, prepared for transport, and loaded into the evacuation vehicle with efficiency that spoke well of the unit's training and experience. As the convoy prepared to return to base, Maria found herself riding in the back of the medical vehicle with the 2 casualties, monitoring their condition and maintaining communication with the base medical facility. Both soldiers were stable, alert, and optimistic about their recovery. "Thanks, Sergeant Santos," Thompson said as they bounced along the desert road. "Rodriguez is a good soldier, but it's nice to have a real medic working on us." "Rodriguez did excellent work," Maria replied diplomatically. "The tourniquet application probably saved your leg, Private Miller." That was textbook emergency medical care. Rodriguez, who was riding in the same vehicle, looked up at the praise with surprise and something that might have been gratitude. Maria made a mental note that managing personalities and egos would be just as important as managing medical situations in this unit. The return journey passed without incident, and soon they were back within the protective walls of Forward Operating Base Zulu. The casualties were transferred to the base medical facility for further treatment and eventual evacuation to a larger medical center. Both were expected to make full recoveries, which was exactly the kind of outcome that built confidence and trust within a unit. As Maria cleaned and restocked her equipment, she was aware of the soldiers around her. Conversations were quieter than usual, but she caught fragments that told her the story was already spreading. The new medic had handled her first emergency call professionally and successfully. The casualties were stable, the mission had gone smoothly, and everyone had returned safely. "Not bad for a first day," Rodriguez said, helping her organize medical supplies. "You handled that well out there." "Thanks. You did good work too." That tourniquet application was exactly right. Rodriguez paused in his work, seeming to consider something. "Can I ask you something, Santos? When you called that play on the tourniquets over the radio, you sounded pretty confident about deviating from standard protocol. Where'd that come from?" Maria looked up from the inventory checklist she was completing. It was a fair question, and Rodriguez had earned the right to ask it by supporting her during the mission. Experience. Sometimes the textbook answer isn't the best answer for the specific situation you're facing. What kind of experience? The kind that comes from being deployed in places where the textbook solutions don't always work. Maria kept her answer deliberately vague, but something in her tone suggested depths that Rodriguez hadn't expected. As the day progressed, and word of the successful mission spread through the base, Maria began to notice subtle changes in how the other soldiers interacted with her. The polite but distant professionalism of the morning was being replaced by something warmer. Not quite acceptance yet, but a willingness to give her the benefit of the doubt. The evening briefing was held in the main command tent, with the company commander reviewing the day's activities and planning for the next day's operations. Maria attended as the unit's senior medical representative, taking notes on upcoming missions and potential medical support requirements. Captain Jennifer Walsh, the company commander, was a compact woman with sharp eyes and the kind of calm authority that came from extensive combat experience. She acknowledged Maria's presence with a nod and included her in the operational planning discussions. "Good work today, Sergeant Santos," Captain Walsh said as the briefing concluded. "Quick response, professional execution, positive outcome. That's exactly what this unit needs." "Thank you, ma'am." Rodriguez deserves credit too. His advanced preparation made the difference. Captain Walsh glanced at Rodriguez, who was standing nearby with an expression of surprise at being publicly acknowledged. "Noted, Sergeant. Continue the good work, both of you." As the officers and senior enlisted personnel filed out of the briefing tent, Rodriguez lingered near Maria. "Thanks for that. You didn't have to mention my part." "Yes, I did. This unit works as a team, or it doesn't work at all." Rodriguez studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Honestly, another fresh-faced medic who'd panic under pressure and need constant hand-holding." Rodriguez shrugged. "I've seen a few of those over the years. And what do you think now?" "I think there's more to Staff Sergeant Maria Santos than meets the eye." As they walked back toward their quarters, Maria reflected on her first day with the unit. The medical emergency had gone well, but she knew that one successful mission didn't establish lasting credibility. Combat deployments were marathons, not sprints, and she would need to prove herself repeatedly over the coming months. What she didn't know yet was how dramatically that proof would change not just her standing within a unit, but the entire dynamic of their deployment. The small patches adorning her left shoulder told a story that none of her new teammates had yet learned to read. But they would, and when they did, everything would change. The desert night was settling over forward operating base Zulu, bringing with it the kind of quiet that only existed in remote military outposts. Guard shifts were changing, equipment was being secured, and soldiers were settling into the routines that would carry them through another night in a hostile environment. Maria Santos lay on her narrow bunk, reviewing the events of her first day and mentally preparing for whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. Around her, the base continued its nocturnal operations, radio chatter, vehicle maintenance, and the constant vigilance that kept them all alive. She thought about the wounded soldiers who were by now receiving excellent care at a larger medical facility. She thought about Rodriguez, whose competence and professionalism had impressed her more than she'd initially expected. and she thought about Captain Walsh, whose brief acknowledgement had carried the weight of hard-earned respect. But mostly, she thought about the unit itself, the men and women who would depend on her skills and judgment in the months ahead. They were good soldiers, professional and experienced, but they carried the accumulated stress of an extended deployment. Building their confidence in her abilities would be crucial not just for her own success, but for the morale and effectiveness of the entire unit. As she drifted off to sleep, Maria was unaware of the conversations taking place in other parts of the base. Soldiers were talking about the new medic, sharing their impressions, and forming opinions that would influence unit dynamics for months to come. The consensus was cautiously positive. She handled her first test well, but time would tell if she could maintain that standard under different circumstances. What none of them yet realized was that Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had faced circumstances that would test any soldier's limits. The patches on her uniform told a story of deployments in places that didn't officially exist, of missions that weren't recorded in any official records, and of capabilities that went far beyond standard combat medic training. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and new opportunities to prove herself. But tonight, Forward Operating Base Zulu was quiet, secure, and staffed by a medical team that had already demonstrated they could work together effectively when lives were on the line. The foundation had been laid. Now it was time to build on it. The snipers mark 3 weeks after her arrival at Forward Operating Base Zulu. Maria Santos had settled into the rhythm of deployment life. The initial success of her first mission had earned her cautious acceptance from most of the unit, but she could sense that deeper trust would require more than competent medical care. In a combat environment, respect was earned through demonstrated capability under pressure, and she hadn't yet faced the kind of test that would truly establish her place within the unit. The opportunity came on a Tuesday morning when Captain Walsh called an emergency briefing for all senior personnel. Maria arrived at the command tent to find an atmosphere of tense urgency that suggested something significant had developed overnight. "We've got a problem," Captain Walsh began without preamble, gesturing toward the tactical map displayed on the wall. "Intelligence indicates that a high-value target has been identified in a village approximately 15 kilometers northeast of our position. The target is a known bomb maker responsible for at least 6 IED attacks in our area of operations over the past 2 months." Murmurs of interest and anticipation rippled through the assembled soldiers. Hunting down bomb makers was always a priority. They represented one of the most significant threats to coalition forces and innocent civilians alike. "The complication," Captain Walsh continued, "is that the target is currently located in a heavily populated civilian area. Standard assault tactics would put non-combatants at unacceptable risk. We need a surgical approach, quick, precise, and with minimal collateral damage." First Sergeant Mike Peterson, a grizzled veteran with 23 years of service, leaned forward. "What kind of surgical approach are we talking about, ma'am?" "Sniper team," Captain Walsh replied. "We insert a 2-person team at night, establish overwatch on the target building, and wait for a clean shot. The target follows a predictable routine. Every morning at approximately 0630 hours, he steps onto the roof of his building to check a radio antenna. That's our window." Maria listened with professional interest, assuming her role would be limited to providing medical support for the operation. Sniper missions were typically handled by specially trained marksmen with extensive experience in precision shooting. Her job would be to ensure the team was medically prepared and to provide emergency support if something went wrong. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Captain Walsh continued, "you'll be providing overwatch security and communication support. The sniper will be—" She paused, consulting her notes. "That's where we have a problem. Our designated marksman, Sergeant Williams, is currently on medical leave following his injury last week. Our backup sniper, Corporal Davis, is at the Forward Operating Base receiving specialized training and won't return for another 10 days. The silence in the tent was heavy with implication. Without a qualified sniper, the mission would have to be postponed or converted to a more conventional assault, both of which presented significant disadvantages. "Ma'am," First Sergeant Peterson said carefully. What about requesting support from battalion? They might have a sniper team available. Negative, Captain Walsh replied. Battalion has 3 other priority missions running concurrently. We're on our own for this one, and the intelligence window is only valid for the next 48 hours. Rodriguez raised his hand. What's the engagement range for this shot? Captain Walsh consulted her briefing materials. Approximately 450 meters from the nearest feasible firing position. Not an impossible shot, but it requires significant precision given the urban environment and potential for civilian casualties. Maria found herself studying the tactical map with growing interest. 450 meters was well within the effective range of the unit's sniper rifles, but it was also a distance that demanded exceptional marksmanship skills. A miss could result in civilian casualties, compromise the mission, and potentially escalate the security situation throughout the entire region. Ma'am, she said, surprising herself by speaking up, what's the backup plan if we can't field a sniper team? Captain Walsh looked at her with mild surprise. Conventional assault at 0200 hours tomorrow night. We surround the building, breach simultaneously from multiple entry points, and neutralize the target before he can escape or detonate any explosive devices he might have prepared. Casualty estimates? Potentially significant. The target building is surrounded by family residences, and intelligence suggests the bomb maker may have rigged his location with explosive traps. We're looking at possible civilian casualties and likely friendly casualties even in a best-case scenario. Maria nodded thoughtfully, weighing options and considering possibilities she probably shouldn't have been considering. The smart play was to keep quiet, support whatever decision the command team made, and focus on her medical responsibilities. But 450 meters was a distance she'd engaged targets at before, albeit in circumstances that weren't reflected in her official military record. Ma'am, she said slowly, I might have a solution. Every eye in the tent turned toward her. Captain Walsh raised an eyebrow. What kind of solution, Sergeant Santos? I'm qualified as a marksman. I could potentially serve as the sniper for this mission. The silence that followed was so complete that Maria could hear the generator humming outside the tent. First Sergeant Peterson was the first to break it, his voice carrying a mixture of confusion and skepticism. Santos, you're a combat medic. Medics don't typically cross-train as snipers. No, First Sergeant, they don't typically, Maria agreed. But I have additional qualifications that might be relevant to this situation. Captain Walsh studied her with sharp attention. What kind of additional qualifications? Maria took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would fundamentally change how the unit perceived her. I'm graduate qualified from the U.S. Army Sniper School at Fort Benning. I'm also certified in urban precision shooting by the Special Operations Command. I've successfully completed long-range precision shooting courses with both the Marine Corps and Air Force Special Operations communities. The silence returned, even heavier than before. Rodriguez was staring at her with an expression of complete bewilderment. First Sergeant Peterson's eyebrows had disappeared completely into his hairline. Captain Walsh was reviewing Maria's personnel file with renewed interest. Those qualifications aren't reflected in your standard military record, Captain Walsh observed. No, ma'am, they're not. They're listed in a separate file that requires special access to review. And why would a combat medic have access to that level of specialized sniper training? Maria chose her words carefully. I've served in units that required cross-training in multiple specialties. Medical support was my primary role, but operational requirements sometimes demanded additional capabilities. It was a diplomatic way of saying that she'd served with special operations units that couldn't always afford the luxury of having separate specialists for every mission requirement. Combat medics in those units were expected to maintain proficiency in whatever skills the mission demanded, whether that was advanced medical procedures, precision shooting, explosives handling, or close-quarters combat. Captain Walsh closed Maria's file and looked directly at her. Sergeant Santos, are you telling me that you're confident you can make a 450-meter precision shot in an urban environment with civilian safety considerations? Yes, ma'am. Assuming I have access to appropriate equipment and adequate preparation time. What do you need? I'll need to zero the rifle personally, review current weather data, conduct a reconnaissance of the firing position, and coordinate timing with the surveillance team. I'll also need Rodriguez as my spotter. He knows the area and the unit procedures better than I do. Rodriguez's expression had shifted from bewilderment to something approaching excitement. Santos, you're telling us you can actually do this? I'm telling you I'm qualified to do this. Success depends on preparation, conditions, and execution, like any other military operation. Captain Walsh made her decision with the kind of quick authority that marked effective combat leaders. First Sergeant, prepare a detailed mission brief for a two-person sniper team. Rodriguez, you're the spotter. Santos, you're the shooter. Mission launch is 2,200 hours tonight, with engagement authorization at first light tomorrow. As the briefing broke up and soldiers began their mission preparations, Maria found herself surrounded by teammates who were seeing her with completely new eyes. The quiet combat medic who had performed competently during medical emergencies was apparently something much more interesting than any of them had suspected. Santos, Rodriguez said as they walked toward the armory. Where the hell did you learn to shoot like that? Here and there, Maria replied diplomatically. Different units, different requirements. What kind of different units? Maria paused at the armory door, considering how much to reveal. The kind that don't always appear in official records. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. Special operations? I can't discuss specific unit assignments, but I can tell you that I'm confident in my ability to make this shot safely and successfully. The armory was managed by Staff Sergeant Tony Mitchell, a weapons specialist who took pride in maintaining the unit's small arms in perfect condition. When Maria and Rodriguez explained their mission requirements, his professional interest was immediately engaged. Sniper mission? Mitchell said, unlocking the cabinet that contained the unit's precision rifles. Haven't had one of those in months. What's your experience level, Santos? Extensive, Maria replied simply, accepting the rifle Mitchell handed her. The weapon was an M24 sniper weapon system, a bolt-action rifle based on the Remington 700 platform. Maria's hands moved over it with practiced familiarity, checking the action, examining the scope mounting, and assessing the overall condition of the weapon. Her movements were quick and confident, the kind of familiarity that came from extensive training and operational experience. Nice weapon, she commented, working the bolt action to test the trigger mechanism. When was it last zeroed? About 3 weeks ago, Mitchell replied, watching her examination with professional curiosity. But it was zeroed for Sergeant Williams, and every shooter is different. Exactly. I'll need to re-zero for my specific shooting characteristics. What's our range situation? We've got a 500-meter range set up about 2 clicks south of the base. Not ideal, but it'll give you what you need for a 450 engagement. The next 6 hours were dedicated to intensive preparation. Maria spent 2 hours at the range, carefully adjusting the rifle zero to match her shooting technique and confirming her accuracy at various distances. Rodriguez worked with her as a spotter, learning her communication preferences and shooting rhythm. The re-zeroing process revealed just how skilled Maria actually was. Her initial shots at 400 meters were grouped within a 2-inch circle, precision that impressed even the experienced weapons specialist who accompanied them to observe the session. Damn, Santos, Mitchell said after watching her put 5 consecutive rounds into a target area no larger than a playing card. Where'd you learn to shoot like that? Practice, Maria replied, making final adjustments to the scope. Lots and lots of practice. But Rodriguez, who had been observing her technique through his spotting scope, noticed details that suggested more than just practice. Maria's breathing control, body positioning, and trigger discipline were flawless, the kind of precision that came from intensive professional training and extensive operational experience. Santos, he said as they prepared to return to base, I've worked with a lot of shooters over the years. You're not just good, you're exceptional. That's not something you get from standard military training. Maria secured the rifle in its case, before responding. Rodriguez, tomorrow morning I'm going to put a bullet exactly where it needs to go, safely and professionally. That's what matters. Everything else is just background. The evening briefing covered every aspect of the mission in exhaustive detail. Weather conditions, wind patterns, civilian movement patterns, target behavior, contingency plans, and emergency procedures. Maria listened carefully, asking technical questions that demonstrated her thorough understanding of precision shooting in complex environments. Captain Walsh assigned additional support personnel to ensure mission success. A communications specialist would maintain constant contact with the sniper team. A quick reaction force would be positioned to provide assistance if needed, and a medical team would be standing by in case of emergency. Final question, Sergeant Santos, Captain Walsh said as the briefing concluded. Are you confident in this mission? Yes, ma'am. The conditions are well within my operational parameters. Operational parameters was an interesting choice of words that didn't go unnoticed by the experienced officers in the room. It suggested familiarity with mission planning terminology that went beyond standard combat medic training. As the team made final preparations for the night insertion, Maria found herself reflecting on the path that had brought her to this moment. 3 weeks ago, she had been a new combat medic trying to establish credibility with an unfamiliar unit. Now, she was preparing to undertake one of the most technically demanding and strategically important missions her unit had faced during their deployment. The transition felt natural to her, but she knew it appeared dramatic and unexpected to her teammates. Combat medics weren't supposed to be expert marksmen. They weren't supposed to have specialized training from multiple special operations schools. They weren't supposed to speak casually about operational parameters and precision shooting in urban environments. Rodriguez approached her as she completed her final equipment check. Santos, can I ask you something personal? Depends on how personal. When you showed up here 3 weeks ago, you were just another combat medic getting assigned to our unit. Now you're about to undertake a precision sniper mission that could determine the success or failure of a major operation. How does that happen? Maria considered her response carefully. Sometimes people are more than their job description suggests. That's not really an answer. It's the only answer I can give you right now. Rodriguez nodded slowly. Fair enough. But Santos, after tomorrow, people are going to ask questions. The kind of questions that might require more detailed answers. I know, Maria replied. But tomorrow, let's focus on completing the mission successfully. Everything else can wait. At 2,200 hours, the sniper team departed forward operating base Zulu in a specially modified vehicle designed for covert insertion. Maria carried the precision rifle, night vision equipment, and specialized ammunition. Rodriguez carried spotting equipment, communications gear, and additional security weapons. The insertion went smoothly, with the team reaching their predetermined firing position without incident. The location was a partially constructed building that provided excellent concealment and a clear line of sight to the target area 450 meters away. As they settled into position and began their surveillance routine, Maria felt the familiar calm that came with precision shooting operations. This was work she understood, work she was exceptionally good at, work that required the kind of focused concentration that made everything else fade into the background. Rodriguez established communications with base and confirmed their position. Weather conditions were optimal, with minimal wind and clear visibility. The target building showed signs of normal activity, with lights visible in several windows and occasional movement detected through thermal imaging. All stations, this is Overwatch, Rodriguez reported quietly. We are in position and ready for first light surveillance. Copy, Overwatch. Mission is approved for execution on target confirmation. As they settled in for the long wait until dawn, Maria reflected on the complexity of the situation she found herself in. Tomorrow morning, when she took the shot that would neutralize the bomb maker, she would also be taking a significant step toward revealing capabilities that she had carefully kept hidden since arriving at the base. The unit had accepted her as a competent combat medic. After tomorrow, they would know that Staff Sergeant Maria Santos was something much more interesting and much more dangerous than they had initially believed. The question was whether that knowledge would strengthen or complicate her relationship with the soldiers she served alongside. But that was tomorrow's concern. Tonight, she had a mission to complete and a target to eliminate. Everything else was secondary to ensuring that the bomb maker who had killed and wounded so many innocent people would never have another opportunity to do harm. The night passed slowly but peacefully. At 0615 hours, as the first light of dawn began to illuminate the target area, Rodriguez spotted movement in the building they were watching. Target building showing activity, he reported quietly. Stand by for target identification. At exactly 0628 hours, a figure emerged onto the roof of the target building, moving toward the radio antenna that had been identified during the mission briefing. Rodriguez confirmed target identification through his spotting scope. Target confirmed. Male, approximately 40 years of age, wearing dark clothing, approaching the antenna installation. Maria acquired the target through her rifle scope, confirming the identification and assessing the shot parameters. Range, 453 meters. Wind, negligible. Target behavior, predictable and stable. Shot preparation complete, she reported. Ready to engage on command. You have authorization to engage, came the response for base. Maria took a deep breath, settled into her shooting position, and placed her crosshairs precisely on target. The shot was well within her capabilities, a routine engagement under ideal conditions. Send it, Rodriguez whispered. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the desert morning. Through her scope, Maria watched the target drop immediately, the impact precisely placed and instantly effective. Target down, Rodriguez confirmed. Clean hit, target eliminated. Outstanding work, Overwatch. Prepare for immediate extraction. As they packed their equipment and prepared to leave the firing position, Rodriguez looked at Maria with an expression of professional admiration mixed with puzzled curiosity. Santos, that was one of the most impressive shots I've ever witnessed. Thanks. Good spotting made the difference. What did you really learn to shoot like that? Maria secured the rifle and shouldered her pack. Rodriguez, there are things about my background that I can't discuss in detail. What I can tell you is that I'm here to do whatever this unit needs me to do, whether that's medical support or precision shooting or anything else that comes up. As they began their journey back to the base, Rodriguez processed what he had just witnessed. The quiet combat medic who had arrived 3 weeks earlier had just executed a perfect long-range precision shot under combat conditions. It was a level of skill that suggested training and experience far beyond anything reflected in her official personnel records. When they arrived back at Forward Operating Base Zulu, they found the entire unit buzzing with excitement about the mission's success. The elimination of the bomb maker represented a significant tactical victory and would likely save numerous lives in the weeks and months ahead. Captain Walsh debriefed the team personally, expressing her satisfaction with both the planning and execution of the operation. Exceptional work, both of you. Professional, precise, and exactly what this situation required. But as word of the mission spread throughout the base, Maria began to notice a change in how the other soldiers looked at her. The success of the sniper mission had revealed capabilities that fundamentally altered their perception of who she was and what she might be capable of. The quiet respect she had earned as a competent combat medic was evolving into something much more complex. A mixture of professional admiration, curiosity, and the kind of wariness that soldiers developed around teammates who turned out to be significantly more dangerous than they initially appeared. The transformation was beginning, and there was no going back. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos was no longer just the unit's medic. She was becoming something else entirely, and the story of that transformation was written in the small patches adorning her uniform that none of her teammates had yet learned to read properly. But they would learn, and when they did, everything would change once again. Hashtag the Wall of Silence. 6 weeks had passed since the sniper mission, and Maria Santos found herself in an increasingly complex position within her unit. The successful elimination of the bomb maker had earned her widespread respect and professional admiration, but it had also raised questions that she couldn't fully answer without revealing aspects of her background that remained classified. The questions came in different forms from different people. Rodriguez had become more direct in his inquiries about her training and experience. Other soldiers would make casual comments about her shooting skills or ask seemingly innocent questions about previous deployments. Captain Walsh had begun including her in planning discussions that typically involved only senior officers and specialized personnel. Most challenging of all was the growing sense that her teammates were beginning to see her as something other than a traditional combat medic. She was still performing her medical duties competently and professionally, but everyone knew that Staff Sergeant Maria Santos possessed capabilities that extended far beyond standard medical training. The situation came to a head on a Thursday morning when Private First Class Jessica Chun approached her during routine equipment maintenance. Chun was one of the unit's youngest soldiers, barely 20 years old, but she was also one of the most observant and naturally curious. "Sergeant Santos," Chun said, settling down beside Maria as she cleaned medical equipment. "Can I ask you about something I noticed?" "Sure, Chun. What's on your mind?" "It's about your uniform patches. I've been looking at them for weeks, trying to figure out what they all mean." Maria continued her cleaning routine, but she was suddenly very aware of Chen's attention. "What about them?" "Well, most of them I can identify. The medical patch, obviously. The airborne wings. The standard deployment patches. But there are several others that I can't figure out, and when I try to look them up, I can't find any information about them." This was exactly the conversation Maria had been hoping to avoid, but she'd known it would come eventually. Chen was too observant and too persistent to simply accept vague answers indefinitely. "Which patches are you curious about?" Maria asked carefully. Chen pointed to a small, subdued patch on Maria's left shoulder. "That one, for example. I've never seen anything like it, and none of the other soldiers recognize it either." The patch in question was indeed unusual, a simple design in muted colors that would be easily overlooked by casual observers. But to those who knew what to look for, it identified the wearer as a graduate of a training program that officially didn't exist. "Some patches represent specialized training that isn't widely publicized," Maria replied diplomatically. "What kind of specialized training?" "The kind that's difficult to discuss in detail." Chun studied Maria's expression with the intensity that marked her as someone who would eventually become an outstanding intelligence analyst or investigator. "Sergeant Santos, with respect, that's not really an answer." "No, it's not. But it's the answer I can give you." Before Chun could pursue the conversation further, the base alarm began sounding, indicating an incoming emergency. Both soldiers immediately shifted into response mode, but Maria could sense that Chen's curiosity had been intensified rather than satisfied by their exchange. The emergency turned out to be a convoy that had been hit by a sophisticated ambush approximately 20 kilometers east of their position. Multiple casualties were reported, including several serious injuries that would require immediate advanced medical intervention. As Maria prepared her emergency medical kit, Captain Walsh approached with a mission briefing that was more complex than the typical medical support operation. "Santos, this isn't a standard casualty evacuation," Captain Walsh began. "Intelligence suggests the ambush was conducted by a well-organized hostile force that may still be active in the area. The convoy is currently pinned down and requesting both medical support and tactical assistance." "What kind of tactical assistance, ma'am?" The convoy commander reports that hostile forces are positioned in elevated terrain that provides them with advantageous firing positions. "Our people are taking accurate fire from multiple directions and can't maneuver to more defensible positions while carrying wounded personnel." Maria understood the implications immediately. "You need someone to neutralize the hostile shooting positions." "That's correct. We're looking at a combined medical evacuation and precision shooting mission. Are you prepared to handle both aspects?" "Yes, ma'am." "What's the tactical situation?" Captain Walsh spread a tactical map across the briefing table. Hostile forces are positioned here, here, and here, she said, pointing to elevated positions overlooking the convoy's location. Engagement ranges vary from 300 to 600 meters. The convoy is trapped in a depression with limited cover and no ability to maneuver. Equipment requirements: full medical kit plus precision shooting capability. Rodriguez will serve as your spotter and communication specialist. Lieutenant Morrison will command a quick reaction force to provide security and assist with casualty evacuation once the shooting positions are neutralized. As Maria studied the tactical situation, she was aware of the other soldiers in the briefing tent watching her with intense interest. 6 weeks ago, they would have been surprised to see a combat medic included in tactical planning discussions. Now, they accepted her dual role as both medical support and precision shooting specialist. The mission launched 30 minutes later with Maria and Rodriguez in the lead vehicle, followed by Lieutenant Morrison's quick reaction force. The convoy's location was reached after a tense 20-minute drive through terrain that offered multiple opportunities for additional ambushes. When they arrived at the scene, Maria immediately understood why the original convoy had been unable to extract themselves from the situation. The hostile forces had chosen their positions expertly, creating overlapping fields of fire that made movement across the open ground essentially impossible. Overwatch, this is base, Rodriguez reported as they established their firing position. We are in position and assessing the tactical situation. Copy, Overwatch. Convoy reports 3 hostile shooting positions remaining active. They have 4 casualties requiring immediate medical attention. Maria acquired the first target through her rifle scope, a hostile shooter positioned approximately 400 meters away on a rocky outcropping that provided excellent concealment and protection. The shot was challenging but manageable, requiring careful calculation of wind drift and bullet drop over the extended range. Target acquired, she reported. Hostile shooter, elevated position, range 410 meters. You are cleared to engage. The first shot was perfect, immediately neutralizing the hostile shooter and eliminating one of the 3 problematic firing positions. The second target was more difficult, positioned at nearly 600 meters and partially concealed behind natural terrain features. Long shot, Rodriguez observed, spotting for her through his scope. Wind is variable at that range. I see it. Adjusting for conditions. The second shot required more careful preparation, but it was equally effective. The third target, apparently recognizing that his position was being systematically eliminated, attempted to relocate, but exposed himself in the process. Target moving, Rodriguez reported, still within engagement range. Got him. The third shot ended the engagement, neutralizing the final hostile position and allowing the pinned convoy to begin moving toward more defensible terrain. All hostile positions neutralized, Maria reported. Convoy is clear to move. Outstanding work, Overwatch. Proceed to casualty collection point for medical support. The medical aspect of the mission proved to be just as challenging as the tactical shooting. For soldiers had been wounded in the ambush too seriously, and all required immediate medical intervention to stabilize their conditions for evacuation. Maria worked with quick efficiency, triaging the casualties and providing advanced trauma care under less than ideal conditions. Rodriguez assisted competently, following her instructions and helping to coordinate the evacuation of the wounded soldiers. How are they looking? Lieutenant Morrison asked as the casualties were prepared for transport. All stable for evacuation, Maria replied. 2 will need immediate surgery when they reach the field hospital, but they should all make full recoveries. The return journey was completed without incident, but Maria was aware of a subtle change in the atmosphere within her unit. The successful completion of another combined medical and tactical mission had further reinforced her reputation as a uniquely capable soldier, but it had also intensified curiosity about her background and training. That evening, during the mission debrief, Captain Walsh made an observation that brought the unspoken questions into the open. Sergeant Santos, in the past 6 weeks, you've successfully completed a precision sniper mission, a combined tactical and medical operation, and numerous standard medical support missions. That represents an unusually diverse skill set for a combat medic. Yes, ma'am. I've been fortunate to receive comprehensive training in multiple specialties. What kind of comprehensive training produces that level of proficiency in such different areas? Maria paused, recognizing that she had reached a decision point. She could continue providing vague, non-committal answers, but doing so was becoming increasingly difficult and potentially counterproductive. Her unit deserved to understand who they were serving alongside, at least to the extent that classification restrictions allowed. Ma'am, I've served in units that required cross-training in multiple specialties. Medical support was always my primary role, but operational requirements sometimes demanded additional capabilities in areas like precision shooting, tactical communications, and specialized weapons handling. Special operations units? I can't discuss specific unit assignments, but yes, I've served in specialized roles that required training beyond standard medical education. Captain Walsh nodded slowly, accepting the limitations Maria faced in discussing her background while acknowledging the significance of what she had revealed. Understood, Sergeant. Thank you for your continued excellent service to this unit. As the debrief concluded and the soldiers began to disperse, Maria noticed that several of them were lingering nearby, obviously hoping to overhear more details about her background. The curiosity that had been building for weeks was approaching a critical point. Rodriguez approached her as she prepared to leave the briefing tent. Santos, can we talk privately? Sure. What's on your mind? They walked to a quiet area near the perimeter of the base, where their conversation wouldn't be overheard by other soldiers. Look, Rodriguez began, I know you can't discuss specific details about your previous assignments, but the guys are starting to ask questions that I can't answer. They want to know who you really are and what kind of training you've had. What kind of questions? Questions like whether you've ever served with Delta Force, or the Rangers, or Special Forces. Questions about whether you've been involved in classified operations. Questions about whether Maria Santos is even your real name. The last question surprised Maria, although she realized it probably shouldn't have. Soldiers who serve in highly classified roles sometimes operated under identities that protected their real names and backgrounds from exposure. My name is Maria Santos, she said firmly. That's not an operational alias. Okay, but what about the other questions? Have you served with special operations units? Maria considered her response carefully. Rodriguez, I've served in roles that required specialized training and capabilities. I can't provide more specific details than that without violating classification restrictions. But I can tell you that everything I've done since arriving at this unit has been in support of our mission and the safety of our soldiers. Rodriguez nodded, accepting the limitations while clearly wanting more information. The thing is, Santos, the guys trust you. They've seen what you can do, and they know you're someone they can depend on. But they also know that there's more to your story than what's in your official personnel file. What do they want to know? They want to know if you're still operating under classified orders. They want to know if your assignment to this unit is part of some larger operation they haven't been briefed on. They want to know if you're here to evaluate them, or monitor them, or report on their activities. These were exactly the concerns Maria had hoped to avoid, but she realized they were probably inevitable given the circumstances of her assignment and the capabilities she'd demonstrated. Rodriguez, I'm here as your combat medic. Period. I'm not conducting any kind of evaluation or monitoring operation. My only mission is to provide medical support and whatever other assistance this unit needs to complete their assigned tasks safely and successfully. But you're clearly overqualified to be serving as a standard combat medic in a conventional unit. Maybe, but sometimes people end up in positions that don't fully utilize their training and experience. That doesn't mean they're there for hidden reasons. Rodriguez studied her expression, trying to assess the truth of her statements. Santos, what happens when people start recognizing those patches on your uniform? What do you mean? I mean, some of those patches represent training programs, and unit assignments that very few people have access to. Eventually, someone is going to see them who knows what they mean. When that happens, questions are going to be asked that go far beyond anything I or the other soldiers in this unit might wonder about. This was a concern that Maria had been thinking about increasingly as her profile within the unit had risen. The patches on her uniform told a story that she had been hoping to keep private, but they were also part of her official military uniform and couldn't simply be removed or hidden. "I'll deal with that situation when it arises," she said finally. "Santos, I think it's already arising. Captain Walsh has been asking questions about your background. First Sergeant Peterson has been reviewing your personnel file. There's talk about requesting a more detailed background briefing from higher headquarters." Maria felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Once higher headquarters became involved in reviewing her background, the carefully constructed boundaries between her public and classified roles would become much more difficult to maintain. "How much talk?" "Enough that I thought you should know about it. The thing is, everyone in the unit respects you and trusts you, but they also know that you're not what you initially appear to be. That creates uncertainty, and uncertainty can be a problem in a combat environment." Rodriguez was right, and Maria knew it. Military units operated on trust and clear understanding of roles and capabilities. When soldiers began questioning the true identity or mission of a team member, it could undermine unit cohesion and effectiveness. "What do you think I should do?" "I think you should consider whether it's possible to provide more information about your background without violating classification restrictions. The guys don't need to know every detail, but they need to know enough to understand who you are and why you're here. And if I can't provide that information, then we figure out how to manage the situation so that it doesn't become a bigger problem than it needs to be." As they walked back toward the main part of the base, Maria reflected on the complexity of her situation. She had joined this unit hoping to serve quietly as a combat medic while the more specialized aspects of her background remained private. But operational requirements and mission needs had forced her to reveal capabilities that made anonymity impossible. The question now was whether she could find a way to satisfy her unit's curiosity about her background without compromising the classification restrictions that governed much of her previous service. It was a delicate balance that would require careful thought and possibly some guidance from higher headquarters. Later that evening, as Maria completed her end-of-day equipment maintenance, Private Chun approached her again with the same determined curiosity that had marked their earlier conversation. "Sergeant Santos, I've been thinking about our conversation this morning." "What about it?" "I think I figured out what some of those patches on your uniform represent." Maria paused in her work, suddenly very attentive. "What have you figured out?" Chun lowered her voice, obviously aware that their conversation might be overheard by other soldiers. "I think at least 2 of those patches represent training programs run by Special Operations Command. I think another one might be from a joint service program that cross-trains personnel in multiple specialties." "What makes you think that?" "Research. I spent some time in the communications center this afternoon, using the secure internet connection to look up information about specialized training programs. I found references to programs that match the design and color schemes of some of your patches." This was exactly what Rodriguez had warned Maria about. Once soldiers began conducting detailed research into her background and qualifications, the questions would multiply rapidly and become much more difficult to answer diplomatically. "Chun, I appreciate your curiosity, but some aspects of military service aren't meant for public discussion." "I understand that, Sergeant. But I also think the unit deserves to know who they're serving alongside. We trust you, but we also want to understand who you really are." "Who do you think I am?" Chun hesitated, as if uncertain whether to voice her suspicions. "I think you're someone who has served in highly classified roles with special operations units. I think you have training and experience that goes far beyond anything reflected in your official personnel records. And I think your assignment to this unit might be part of something larger that we haven't been briefed on." The accuracy of Chin's assessment was both impressive and concerning. If a 20-year-old private could piece together that much information through basic research and observation, It was only a matter of time before more senior personnel began asking much more detailed questions. Chen, what you're suggesting raises issues that go beyond what I can discuss with individual soldiers. If you have concerns about classification or operational security, those need to be addressed through appropriate command channels. I'm not trying to compromise anything, Sergeant. I just want to understand the situation we're in. What situation do you think we're in? I think we're serving alongside someone whose background and capabilities are significantly more complex than we initially realized. That's not necessarily a problem, but it is something the unit should understand clearly. Chen was absolutely right, and Maria knew it. The time for vague answers and diplomatic non-responses was rapidly passing. Soon, she would need to find a way to address her unit's questions more directly or risk having those questions escalate to levels where the answers might become much more complicated for everyone involved. As Chun returned to her duties and Maria completed her equipment maintenance, she realized that the careful balance she had been trying to maintain was becoming increasingly unstable. Her dual identity as both combat medic and special operations veteran was creating complications that would soon require resolution. The patches on her uniform had indeed told a story, and her teammates were finally beginning to read that story correctly. The question now was what would happen when they learned the complete truth about Staff Sergeant Maria Santos and the operational background that had prepared her for challenges far beyond standard medical support. The wall of silence was beginning to crack, and once it fell completely, there would be no going back to the simple days when she was just another combat medic trying to earn the trust of an unfamiliar unit. Hashtag the recognition 2 months after Maria's arrival at Forward Operating Base Zulu, the delicate balance she had maintained between her public role as combat medic and her classified background was about to be shattered in a way she had never anticipated. The catalyst came in the form of a routine personnel inspection that would reveal more about her history than any amount of careful questioning or research by her teammates. The inspection was announced by Captain Walsh during the morning briefing with the kind of matter-of-fact tone that military personnel recognized, as meaning the event was both mandatory and non-negotiable. We'll be receiving a visit from Colonel Patricia Hayes, the brigade medical officer, along with Command Sergeant Major Robert Thompson from Special Operations Command, Captain Walsh announced. They'll be conducting a routine assessment of our medical readiness and operational capabilities. Maria felt her stomach drop. Command Sergeant Major Thompson was a name she recognized from her previous assignments, a highly experienced Special Operations veteran who would certainly be familiar with the more unusual aspects of her background and training. The inspection will include individual interviews with all medical personnel, equipment assessments, and a review of our recent medical support operations, Captain Walsh continued. I expect everyone to be prepared to discuss their qualifications, training, and operational experience in detail. Rodriguez glanced at Maria with an expression that mixed curiosity with concern. He had become increasingly aware that her background contained elements that might not withstand detailed scrutiny from senior personnel who had access to classified information systems. After the briefing, Maria found herself walking toward the medical bay with a growing sense of inevitability. The comfortable anonymity she had maintained for 2 months was about to end, and the consequences would affect not just her own position, but potentially the entire unit's understanding of who she was and why she was there. Santos, Rodriguez called, catching up with her as she reached the medical facility. You look like you've seen a ghost. What's wrong? Command Sergeant Major Thompson knows me, Maria replied simply. Knows you how? From previous assignments. He'll recognize my background immediately. Rodriguez paused, understanding the implications. Is that a problem? Potentially. It depends on how much he decides to reveal and how much the unit is prepared to learn about my previous service. Santos, what exactly are you concerned about him revealing? Maria considered her response carefully. Rodriguez, there are aspects of my military service that I've been hoping to keep private. Not because they're problematic, but because they complicate how people perceive my current role and responsibilities. What kind of aspects? Before Maria could respond, a convoy of vehicles appeared at the base entrance, announcing the arrival of the inspection team. Even from a distance, Maria could see Command Sergeant Major Thompson's distinctive profile in a lead vehicle. "We're about to find out," she said grimly. The inspection team arrived with the kind of professional efficiency that marks senior military personnel conducting routine assessments. Colonel Hayes was a compact woman with sharp eyes and the confident bearing of someone who had extensive experience in combat medical operations. Command Sergeant Major Thompson was exactly as Maria remembered him, tall, lean, and possessed of the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of special operations service. The initial briefing took place in the main command tent, with Captain Walsh presenting an overview of the unit's medical capabilities and recent operations. Maria attended as the senior medical representative, taking notes and preparing to answer questions about their medical support procedures. Colonel Hayes asked several technical questions about equipment, supplies, and training that Maria answered professionally and thoroughly. Her responses demonstrated both competence and extensive knowledge of advanced trauma care procedures that impressed both inspectors. "Excellent answers, Sergeant Santos," Colonel Hayes commented. "Your knowledge of advanced trauma procedures is quite comprehensive. Where did you receive your medical training?" "Army Medical Department Center and School of Fort Sam Houston, ma'am, followed by additional training at various specialized programs." "What kind of specialized programs?" "Combat medic training, advanced trauma life support, tactical emergency casualty care, and several others." Command Sergeant Major Thompson had been listening quietly, but Maria could see him studying her with a kind of intense attention that suggested recognition. When Colonel Hayes finished her questions, he stepped forward with a question of his own. "Sergeant Santos, would you mind if I took a closer look at your uniform patches?" The request was polite, but carried the weight of senior rank and obvious authority. Maria stood at attention as Command Sergeant Major Thompson examined the collection of patches adorning her uniform. His inspection was thorough and knowledgeable. Maria could see him identifying specific patches that represented training programs, unit assignments, and qualifications that were not commonly awarded to conventional forces personnel. "This patch," he said, pointing to one of the smaller, more subdued designs, represents graduation from the Special Operations Medical Training course. This one indicates completion of the Joint Special Operations Combat Medic Program. And this one," he paused, studying a particularly unusual patch. "This one indicates assignment to a classified medical support unit that operates under Special Operations Command." The silence in the command tent was profound. Captain Walsh, Rodriguez, and the other personnel present were hearing details about Maria's background that went far beyond anything they had previously suspected. "Yes, Sergeant Major," Maria replied simply. "You're Maria Santos, formerly attached to the 5th Special Forces Group as a Special Operations Combat Medic," Thompson continued, his voice carrying a note of recognition and respect. "You served 3 deployments in Afghanistan with Special Operations units, 1 deployment in Iraq, and 1 classified deployment to an undisclosed location." "Yes, Sergeant Major. You're also a graduate of the Army Sniper School, the Special Operations Advanced Medical Course, and the Joint Service Explosive Ordnance Disposal Basic Course." Each revelation hit the assembled personnel like a physical blow. Maria wasn't just a highly trained combat medic. She was a special operations veteran with qualifications in multiple specialized areas that few soldiers ever had access to. "Why," Command Sergeant Major Thompson asked, "is a special operations combat medic with your qualifications assigned to a conventional infantry unit?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Maria had been dreading this moment for weeks, knowing that eventually someone with appropriate security clearance would ask the question that she couldn't answer without revealing information that might be classified. "Sergeant Major, I requested assignment to conventional forces following my last deployment with special operations units." "Why?" "Personal reasons, Sergeant Major." Thompson studied her expression with the kind of penetrating attention that came from years of evaluating personnel under high-stress conditions. "Sergeant Santos, There are very few personal reasons that would lead someone with your qualifications to request assignment to a conventional unit. Would you care to elaborate? Maria felt the weight of everyone's attention as she considered her response. The truth was complex and personal, involving burnout from years of high-intensity operations, a desire for more straightforward mission parameters, and the need for some distance from the psychological pressures of Special Operations Service. Sergeant Major, after multiple deployments with Special Operations units, I requested assignment that would allow me to serve in a medical role without the additional responsibilities that come with Special Operations missions. It was a diplomatic way of saying that she had needed a break from the intensity and psychological demands of Special Operations Service, but Thompson clearly understood the underlying message. I see. And how has that transition worked out for you? Very well, Sergeant Major. This unit has provided excellent opportunities to focus on medical support while occasionally contributing other capabilities when mission requirements demand it. Colonel Hayes, who had been listening with obvious interest, asked her own follow-up question. Sergeant Santos, given your background and qualifications, do you feel that you're being effectively utilized in your current assignment? The question was loaded with implications. If Maria admitted that her capabilities were underutilized, it might suggest that her assignment should be changed. If she claimed to be fully utilized, it might raise questions about why a conventional unit needed someone with her specialized background. Ma'am, I believe I'm contributing effectively to this unit's mission. My medical responsibilities are substantial and important, and my additional qualifications have been useful when circumstances required them, such as the sniper mission last month. Word of that operation had obviously reached brigade level, which suggested that Maria's activities were being monitored more closely than she had realized. Yes, ma'am. Among other situations, Command Sergeant Major Thompson exchanged a glance with Colonel Hayes that suggested they had discussed Maria's situation before arriving at the base. Sergeant Santos, Thompson said, your current unit commander speaks very highly of your performance and contributions. Captain Walsh has specifically mentioned your professionalism, competence, and positive impact on unit morale and effectiveness. Thank you, Sergeant Major. However, your assignment here raises some questions that we need to address. Personnel with your background and qualifications are not typically assigned to conventional units without specific operational reasons. The implications of Thompson's statement were clear to everyone in the tent. Maria's assignment was unusual enough to warrant attention from senior personnel who had access to information systems that conventional units didn't normally interact with. Is there something about my assignment that requires clarification, Sergeant Major? Not necessarily, but there are administrative issues that need to be addressed to ensure that your service record properly reflects your current role and responsibilities. Captain Walsh, who had been listening with growing amazement to the revelations about her combat medic's background, finally spoke up. Sergeant Major, if I may ask, what kind of administrative issues? Captain, Sergeant Santos's personnel file contains classification restrictions that limit what information is available to conventional unit commanders. Some of her training, qualifications, and operational experience are maintained in separate files that require special access to review. Are you saying that I don't have access to her complete service record? That's correct, Captain. You have access to the information necessary to evaluate her performance as a combat medic, but her complete background includes elements that are maintained under higher classification levels. The room was silent as the implications sank in. Maria's teammates were learning that their combat medic was not only more highly qualified than they had suspected, but that her background included elements so sensitive that even her commanding officer didn't have access to complete information about her previous service. Rodriguez was the first to speak. Sergeant Major, does this mean that Sergeant Santos is operating under some kind of classified mission that we haven't been briefed on? No, Sergeant Rodriguez. Sergeant Santos is serving in her assigned role as your unit's combat medic. The classification restrictions on her background are administrative, not operational. But her assignment here is unusual. Yes, it's unusual. Personnel with her qualifications typically serve in specialized roles rather than conventional medical positions. Maria realized that this conversation was moving in directions that could become problematic for both herself and the unit. The growing curiosity about her background was understandable, but it was also potentially disruptive to unit cohesion and mission focus. "Sergeant Major," she said, "if there are administrative issues that need to be addressed, I'm prepared to work with appropriate personnel to resolve them. However, I prefer that my background not become a distraction from this unit's mission and responsibilities." Thompson nodded approvingly. "Understood, Sergeant Santos. That's exactly the kind of professional attitude I would expect from someone with your background." Colonel Hayes added her own perspective. "Sergeant Santos, from what I've observed today, you're making excellent contributions to this unit in your role as combat medic. Your additional qualifications have clearly been valuable when circumstances required them, but they don't appear to be interfering with your primary medical responsibilities." "Thank you, ma'am. However, I do think it would be beneficial for your unit leadership to have a more complete understanding of your capabilities and background. Not necessarily the classified details, but at least a general appreciation for the level of training and experience you bring to your position." Captain Walsh leaned forward with obvious interest. "What would that involve, ma'am?" "A briefing that provides appropriate information about Sergeant Santos' qualifications and background without compromising classification restrictions. Something that would help your unit understand why she's capable of contributing in multiple areas when mission requirements demand it." The proposal made sense from both operational and administrative perspectives, but Maria was concerned about the long-term implications of having her background more widely known within the unit. "Ma'am," she said, "I'm willing to participate in whatever briefing you think is appropriate, but I'm also concerned about maintaining operational security and unit focus." "Those are valid concerns," Colonel Hayes replied, "but I think the benefits of clarity outweigh the risks of continued uncertainty about your background and qualifications." Command Sergeant Major Thompson added his perspective. "Sergeant Santos, military units operate most effectively when personnel understand each other's capabilities and backgrounds. The mystery surrounding your qualifications may actually be more disruptive than appropriate disclosure." As the inspection continued with examinations of equipment and procedures, Maria reflected on how dramatically the situation had changed in the span of a single morning. Her carefully maintained anonymity was gone, replaced by official recognition of her specialized background and qualifications. The other members of her unit were processing the information they had learned with a mixture of professional respect, curiosity, and the kind of pride that came from realizing they were serving alongside someone with exceptional qualifications and experience. Rodriguez approached her during a break in the inspection activities. "Santos, why didn't you tell us about your special operations background?" "Because I was hoping it wouldn't be relevant to my service with this unit. But it has been relevant. The sniper mission, the combined tactical and medical operations, those capabilities came from your special operations training." "Yes, they did. So why keep it secret?" Maria considered her response carefully. "Rodriguez, I came to this unit hoping to focus on medical support without the complications that come with special operations service. I wasn't trying to hide anything important, but I also wasn't eager to have my background become the primary focus of attention. And now I guess we figure out how to move forward with everyone knowing more about my background than I originally intended them to know. Is that going to be a problem? I don't know. It depends on how people react to the information and whether it changes how they perceive my role within the unit. Santos, speaking for myself, and I think most of the other soldiers, learning about your background makes us proud to serve with you. It also makes us feel more confident about our unit.